what's up you guys? I'm Sara Lubratt and I recently sent out my high fantasy project that I've been calling Project DE out to beta readers. And as a part of that, I've been thinking a lot about the question, how long does it take to write a book? And so today I am answering that question, at least with my experience. So we're going to be talking about how long it took me to write this book. And the timeline that we're talking about today is from my brand new baby idea to hitting the send button to beta readers. Just a real quick disclaimer, I know that everyone writes at very different speeds. I wrote most of this book when I was in college, and so I was obviously very busy and prioritizing school over writing. So yes, it did take me a while to write it, but this is also the first story that I've ever gotten out to beta readers, and so I'm thrilled with that accomplishment in and of itself. So I wanted to talk about my timeline for this book, primarily just for me to look back on in the future and kind of compare future projects to this project, considering that I am no longer in school. I'm finally free from all of that. So without further ado, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up because it really supports my channel. And now let's get into talking about how long it took me to write my Project DE. I came up with the first fragments of this story idea on July 13th, 2016. It was based off of a very similar picture to this one that I found on Pinterest. And sort of from that first idea phase, the idea just kind of kept evolving and changing. And now what the story is today looks nothing like what the story looked like back then. So while I might have had the idea for this story in July of 2016, I didn't actually hit 30,000 words until almost an entire year later, on July 28th, 2017, where I then passed 30,000 words in 71 hours across the three primary documents that the story was in at that point in time. Then we fast forward almost an entire 10 months, and that brings us to July 25th of 2018 when I passed 100,000 words in Project DE. Now would probably be a good time to mention that when I started drafting DE, I thought that it was going to be a high fantasy story that was going to be one book, just like a book that was 400 to 500 pages, because my ideas for the story originally didn't span a series. It was very much enclosed in one book and it would wrap up nicely in one book. Needless to say, that has changed a lot to now, but at this point in time, I was trying to draft the entire story because I thought it was only going to be one book. Then on November 1st of 2018, I passed 200 hours working on Project DE, and that was with 113,000 words. Yes, I do track both word count and time spent on writing and creating and my ideas around creating, because I feel like counting with those two metrics makes me feel like I'm accomplishing a lot, even if I don't get that many words for the amount of time that I spend on something, or if I don't spend that much time on something but I get a lot of words. It's just a nice balance to kind of remind myself that I'm making progress even if the numbers in one of those two categories aren't very big. On February 19th of 2019, I passed 250 hours spent on my Project DE, as well as passing 150,000 words. This is still all in draft one, and if I haven't said it yet, I pantsed the entire project of DE. I did go back and reverse outline at one point in time, but we're not quite there yet. On June 20th of 2019, I ended up passing 300 hours spent on draft one, and then like 2 weeks later on July 3rd, I passed 200,000 words on the rough draft of this story. I think this is also a good time to mention that I was not writing this story in just one document. At this point in time, it was spread across 18 different documents. And yes, it was very hard to find things, but it was also very easy to find things because I had spent several like full days, like 8 hours a day for like 3 days or something, going through and reorganizing all of these 18 documents into being really easy to find things. Like I completely categorized them, numbered stuff, highlighted stuff. It was very intense, but it also was what I needed at the time. But it was somewhere in there where I was either at like 18 or 22 documents that I realized that that many for 200,000 words was probably a few too many, and I decided to go through again and try to trim it all down and condense it into 10 documents. And I ended up doing that on September 9th of 2019. And then roughly as Preptober for NaNoWriMo 2019 was starting, I decided that my Project DE was getting a little unwieldy because of how big it was, because again, we were sitting at over 200,000 words at this point in time. And so I decided to go through and use the story gridding method to reverse outline my project and all of the words that I had come up with until that point to try and figure out what plot points happened when. Because something else I forgot to mention is also that Project DE is told from 3 different points of view, and I wrote these 3 different points of view separately, and each of them had their own documents for a very, very long time. Actually, up through draft 2, they were all separate. So I decided to come up with this lovely thing, which is my outline for book 1. That outline alone took me like 4 or 5 days to figure out, and I decided to do that when I was sitting at 216,000 words in this project. I kind of had to do that because I was losing track of where I was because of how many words were in this story. But then going into that Preptober, I realized that out of the 10 documents that I had, only 21% of the words were in cohesive chapter form, which was really only about 40 to 45,000 words of this 218,000 words that I had. Everything else was notes and stuff that I wanted to add, or world building snippets, or quote snippets, or chapter ideas, or stuff that I wanted to happen later on in the story, because I was starting to realize that this project was very big and nowhere near done. Then December 22nd, 2019, I ended up passing 250,000 words in my project DE. And that was also the day after I graduated college, so I was finally free from college. I was finally ready to take on writing outside of school because I had always put school first. And it was sort of around the start of 2020 that I was realizing that this book was not going to be just one book and that I was really writing a series. And I kind of just had to come to terms with that because I was not ready for that. And so then I told myself, okay, I'm gonna finish writing the rest of the series and then I'll go back and figure out where the first book break falls. And then I'll go through and edit that and I'll get that ready for submission to send out to agents to query to hopefully find a book deal at some point in time. That's not how that ended up going down. In January of 2021, I did discover that I was writing a really good ending point for book 1. And so I decided to wrap up the first book there, which means that what I'm calling the rough draft of DE, all words included written up until this point, even though the actual rough draft of book 1 was less than this, the total number of words that I had written up until the end of draft 1, I had written 260,148 words in 385 hours and 45 minutes of time spent on this project. So because I started this project on July 13th of 2016 and I finished the rough draft on January 21st of 2020, that means that it took me 3 years, 6 months, and 8 days to finish the rough draft of Project DE, which again was not actually really a rough draft of the book. With the number of words that was written for this quote-unquote rough draft, that easily could have been its own trilogy. So take that as you will. I'm taking that as honestly being very impressive considering that I had written 260,000 words in 3.5 years. And all in one project too. Like DE was my focus and has been my focus for so many years at this point. But now that we are finally done talking about draft 1, let's get on to talking about draft 2. Because I had spent so freaking long on draft 1, I did not end up letting Project DE rest between draft 1 and rereading draft 1 to prepare for draft 2. So on the day that I finished draft 1, I actually printed it and I have it right here. This thing lives in my desk because it's gorgeous and thick and it's just a really good reminder that I wrote this thing. And so whenever I get down about writing, I like hold this thing because it is thick. So this bad boy right here was printed on January 21st of 2020, and the 3 character POVs were still separate at this point in time. Like if you were to flip through this, the first roughly third of it is one POV, the second another POV, and the last the third POV, and so it's very segmented in that way. But what I ended up printing out as a part of the rough draft of book 1 was 87,328 words. Also, if you are relatively new to my channel and you want to check out some of like the milestones that I've hit that I'm talking about in this video but can't link up in the cards or down below because YouTube will see that as spammy, I do have this playlist right here, which is my writing milestones playlist that include a lot of the milestones that I'm talking about within this video. So after finishing draft 1, I took some time to reread this puppy. And the reason that I printed this thing out to reread instead of doing it on my computer was that I did not want to change anything, and if it was in a physical copy, it was much harder to change things or make small like line editing notes and stuff because the book wasn't ready for that. And so what I did was went out and bought myself pens and a brand new notebook, and I opened up the notebook, and every time I ran into an inconsistency with plot or character in this manuscript, I would write it down in the notebook so that I was not touching this thing and that all of my notes would be in that notebook. I think when I finished the reread, I think I was at like 18 or 19 pages of notes of like developmental edits and big picture changes that I wanted to make, which honestly makes sense because it did take me 3.5 years to write this book. And then then I finished rereading the rough draft on March 12th of 2020. And then where I was sitting at for the total amount of time spent on DE was 386 hours and 20 minutes after the reread. And then despite being really good at writing down my various milestones for this, I cannot currently figure out when I actually finished draft 2 of DE. I just know that at some point in June of 2020, I reverse outlined DE using note cards because the 3 POVs were separate, and so I went through and wrote down a very short explanation of what happened in each chapter on the back of a note card with the character's first initial and the chapter number of that chapter, and then I laid them all out on my floor, and then I kind of figured out how to intertwine and braid the 3 POVs together after being apart for so long. And then because draft 2 was done, I let DE rest for a month during Camp Nano July 2020 just because I wanted to give it a little bit of space so that I could come back to draft 3 or rereading for draft 3 with fresher eyes so that I could better see its problems and try to make it easier for myself to make improvements. So when I came back to DE after Camp Nano July of 2020, I started the reread of draft 2. And draft 2 ended at 222 pages, 103,839 words. And then after making notes and probably small changes that I probably shouldn't have done at the time, but I guess I did, when I finished rereading draft 2, it sat at 226 pages and 106,124 words. And the total time that I'd spent on DE up through the reread of draft 2 was 475 hours and 55 minutes. And then on November 1st of 2020, I started draft 3 of my project DE. And by the time I started that, I had spent 503 hours and 35 minutes on this project. Starting Nano of 2020, I was really excited because I thought I was going to be able to rewrite draft 2 into draft 3 in a matter of 2 months, so November and December, kind of because the pandemic was in full swing and I was out of school, so I thought that that would give me enough time and enough creative energy to spend towards this project. Needless to say, it didn't quite happen in 2 months. Draft 3, the rewrite, ended up happening in 4 months and 4 days, and I ended up spending a total of 98 hours and 20 minutes on draft 3 itself. And I finished draft 3 on March 4th of 2021. Clocking in at over 600 hours. I think it was 601 hours and 55 minutes for DE as a whole up through draft 3. I was anticipating that draft 3 was going to be longer than draft 2 just because of stuff that I still needed to add, but draft 3 ended up being 119,701 words at a total of 450 double-spaced pages. And then finally, I sent Project DE out to beta readers on March 10th of 2021, which is exactly 1,701 days after I came up with the idea for this book, aka slightly under 4 years and 7 months later. So a really quick recap. Draft 1 took me roughly 3.5 years to do. Draft 2 took me 5 months to work on, and then draft 3 took me 4 months and 4 days, and I did have rests in between those, and I did have rereading periods, but that's how long roughly each draft took me. I am so grateful that I've had YouTube to help follow along my journey so that I can look back on my milestones, as well as writing it down in this document, because that made going through this so much easier than it would have been otherwise. But I want to know down below in the comments if you like tracking your writing progress by word count, time count, or if you even track your various milestones. With that, I think that's going to be all for me today, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please make sure you give it a big thumbs up because it really supports my channel by telling the YouTube algorithm that you liked my video and that someone else might too. If you liked this video and want to see more from me, but you're not already subscribed, make sure you scroll down below, hit that big red subscribe button and that little notification bell next to it so you get updated every time I upload a brand new video. I'm currently posting videos twice a week, and so I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye!